Okay, so you sent us this paper on AI in the economy, and honestly, at first it kind of freaked me out. This
Yeah.
whole idea of like a world where robots are doing all the work and how much wealth you have determines like your access to those robots.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like straight out of like a dystopian sci-fi movie, you know?
Yeah.
But then I started thinking like, what if this isn't just some far-off fantasy? What if the way we're thinking about AI right now, like today, is already shaping our economy?
That's exactly what this paper is suggesting. It's called a strategic wealth accumulation under transformative AI expectations, and it was written by Caleb Maresca actually just last week.
Oh, wow. So this is like hot off the presses.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we dive into like the full-on economic doom and gloom scenario here, let's just like define what we're actually talking about. What is transformative AI or TAI?
All right.
Is this like Skynet becoming self-aware?
Not quite. So TAI refers to a level of AI that can do two major things. First, it can accelerate scientific progress in ways that we can barely imagine. Think AI researchers working 24/7 making connections humans might miss, leading to breakthroughs in like medicine, energy, you name it. And second, it can automate a vast amount of human labor across all sorts of sectors.
Okay, so we're picturing like AI scientists curing diseases, designing self-driving cars, while robot workers are building those cars and maybe even performing surgery.
Exactly. And that second part, the automation of labor, that's where things get really interesting, especially when you start to think about your personal wealth.
Okay, but wait, hold on. People have been talking about like robots taking our jobs for decades. Like, what makes this different?
Well, this paper argues that it's not just about job displacement. It's about a fundamental shift in how income is distributed. Imagine, instead of paying a human employee, a company pays for the upkeep of a robot worker. All the profits from that robot's labor go to the company, or more specifically to the people who own that company. Now imagine this happening across the entire economy.
So instead of wages going to workers, they're going to the owners of the AI systems.
That's the core idea. And the paper suggests that this shift could be even more dramatic than we think, because it's not just about who owns the AI, it's also about how much wealth you have when this all happens.
Okay, so how do they actually study this? Did they build a time machine and peek into the future?
Not quite a time machine, but they used something called a modified neoclassical growth model. It's basically a simulation of how the economy works, but they tweaked it to include this idea of AI changing everything.
So they're basically playing SimCity, but with the future of AI.
You could think of it that way. And to make things even more realistic, they didn't just pick a random date for when TAI might arrive. They actually used expert predictions about AI timelines to create a probability distribution. So it's not just a guess, there's some statistical grounding to it.
Okay, so they have this model that simulates the economy with AI, and they're using real-world predictions about when AI might become this transformative force. What did they actually find?
Well, they found that once TAI arrives, two major things happen. First, economic growth takes off because of those scientific advancements we talked about. In fact, their model predicts a whopping 30% growth per year after TAI arrives.
Wow, 30%. That sounds almost too good to be true. Are they assuming those AI scientists are also working on like an anti-aging serum or something?
That's a good question. And the paper acknowledges that this is a massive jump from the historical average growth rate, which is more like 2%. But they argue it's not entirely unprecedented given the economic leaps we've seen during periods of rapid technological innovation.
Okay, so let's say we buy into the 30% growth scenario for a second. What's the second big thing that happens?
The model assumes that TAI leads to full automation of human labor. And this is where your personal wealth becomes really important.
Okay, so how does my wealth today play into this future robot economy?
Well, the model assumes that the way those AI workers are distributed depends on how wealthy you are when TAI arrives. They use a parameter called lambda, or allam, to control how strongly wealth influences this distribution. Think of it like a dial that determines how much your current wealth translates into future AI-powered income.
Okay, so break this down for me. Let's say this lambda dial is set to 0. What does that mean for me?
If lambda is 0, everyone gets an equal share of the AI labor, regardless of how much wealth they have. So no redistribution, no advantage to being wealthy in that scenario. Everyone gets an equal slice of the robot-powered pie.
Sounds fair, but probably unrealistic. What happens if we turn that lambda dial up a bit?
That's where things get more interesting. The baseline scenario in the paper assumes lambda is 1, which means AI labor is distributed proportionally to wealth. So if you're 10% wealthier than the average person when TAI arrives, you'd get 10% more of those AI workers generating income for you.
So the more wealth you have, the more robot workers you get, and the more robot-generated income you make?
Exactly. And then they look at scenarios where lambda is even greater than 1, meaning wealth differences become even more crucial, potentially creating a situation where the wealthiest people capture most of the benefits of AI.
Okay, so this lambda thing sounds like a pretty big deal. It's basically determining how much of the future AI pie each person gets to eat. But hold on, we're talking about events that could be years or even decades away.
Yeah.
How is this relevant to me, like right now?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the paper's most fascinating findings, the idea of a strategic wedge.
A strategic wedge sounds ominous.
It's not as scary as it sounds. It basically describes how the expectation of TAI, even years in advance, could be affecting things like interest rates today.
Wait, so you're telling me that just the thought of robots taking over our jobs could be messing with my finances right now?
That's exactly what this paper is suggesting. It might sound crazy, but think about it this way. If you knew that in a few years, robots would be doing most of the work, and that the more wealth you had, the more you'd benefit from those robots, wouldn't you start saving more aggressively today?
Okay, yeah, I guess I would. Especially if I thought I could, like, buy my own robot butler someday. But wouldn't everyone else be doing the same thing? Wouldn't that just kind of cancel itself out?
That's where the strategic wedge comes in. It's like everyone's in a race to save more money, but no one's actually getting ahead because the finish line keeps moving. Everyone's saving more, which means there's more money available to lend, but because everyone's so eager to get a piece of that future AI pie, the cost of borrowing money goes up. In other words, interest rates rise.
So it's like trying to win a game of musical chairs where everyone keeps bringing in more chairs, but there's still only one winner.
That's a great analogy. And this is where things get really interesting for you in the real world. Think about what higher interest rates mean. Your mortgage could become more expensive, car loans could cost more, and even just saving money in a regular bank account might not get you as much return as you'd hoped.
Okay, so even if I don't care about owning a robot butler, this AI stuff could still hit me where it hurts my wallet.
Exactly. And this is one of the key findings of the paper. Even with a moderate assumption about how much wealth influences the distribution of AI labor, they found that one-year interest rates could be more than 3 times higher than they would be without TAI expectations.
3 times higher?
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. So what does this mean for someone like me who's just trying to plan for their financial future? Should I be stuffing my mattress with cash right now?
I wouldn't recommend the mattress strategy, but this research does suggest that we need to start thinking differently about how we save and invest.
So should I be buying stock in robot companies? Or maybe investing in some kind of AI hedge fund?
It's not quite that simple. Remember, the timeline for TAI is still uncertain. We don't know when or even if these massive economic shifts will actually happen. Investing in specific companies or technologies is always risky, and even more so when you're dealing with something as unpredictable as AI.
Okay, so no get-rich-quick schemes. Got it. Oh. But what about the bigger picture? The paper also mentioned some implications for things like monetary policy and financial stability. What do they find there?
This is where things get really complicated. You see, central banks typically try to manage the economy by adjusting short-term interest rates. But if those rates are being driven up by long-term expectations about AI rather than by current economic conditions, those tools might not work as well.
So it's like they're trying to steer a ship through a storm, but the current is pushing them in a completely different direction because everyone's freaking out about robots.
Exactly. And this could lead to all sorts of unintended consequences. For example, central banks might try to fight inflation by raising rates, but that could actually make things worse by further incentivizing people to save even more, driving rates even higher.
Yikes. What about financial stability? The paper mentioned something about asset bubbles.
Right. If everyone's rushing to save and invest in anticipation of TAI, that could create bubbles in certain assets, especially those perceived as being related to AI. Imagine a scenario where everyone's pouring money into companies that claim to be developing the next big AI breakthrough, but in reality, many of those companies might not actually deliver on their promises.
So it's like the dot-com bubble all over again. A bunch of hype and speculation leading to a crash.
That's the concern. And because the timeline for TAI is so uncertain, it's even harder to separate the hype from the reality.
Okay, so this is all pretty sobering stuff. We've got potential economic upheaval, wonky interest rates, and maybe even a robot-fueled financial crisis on the horizon. Is there any good news here?
Well, the paper does highlight one potential upside. Remember that 30% annual growth rate we talked about?
Yeah, the one that sounded too good to be true.
Well, if it does happen, that kind of economic growth could lead to a dramatic increase in overall wealth and prosperity. The challenge, of course, is ensuring that those benefits are distributed equitably and that we don't end up in a world where the rich get richer while everyone else struggles to keep up.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. There's a chance that this whole AI thing could actually make life better for everyone, but only if we're smart about it.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting from a policy perspective.
So what can we do? Should we be regulating AI development?
Taxing robots?
Giving everyone a universal basic income?
Those are all important questions, and there's no easy answer. But I think one thing we can all do is to start thinking about how we can make ourselves more adaptable and resilient.
So instead of just focusing on specific job skills that might become obsolete, maybe we should be focusing on developing more general skills like critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, the kind of things that are harder for AI to replicate.
Exactly. And we need to be investing in education and training that prepares people for the jobs of the future, whatever those jobs might be.
So it's not just about surviving the robot apocalypse, it's about thriving in a world where AI is a part of our lives.
Precisely. And I think that's a much more optimistic and frankly more exciting way to approach this.
I agree. But still, this paper raises some big questions about the future of work wealth and even humanity itself. What are some of the key takeaways that people should be thinking about, even if they're not economists or AI experts?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the future of AI is likely to be closely intertwined with wealth and economic power. This isn't just about robots taking our jobs. It's about a fundamental shift in how value is created and distributed in society.
And even if those big changes are still years away, the expectations about AI could have real consequences for our lives today, especially when it comes to things like interest rates and investment decisions.
Absolutely. It's like a ripple effect. Even small changes in expectations can have a big impact on the present.
So we need to be having these conversations now, thinking about how we want to shape this future where AI plays such a significant role. We can't just wait and see what happens.
I completely agree. And I think this paper provides a valuable framework for thinking about these issues. It highlights the potential pitfalls, but it also points towards some potential solutions. For example, if we can find ways to distribute the benefits of AI more equitably, that could help mitigate some of the negative consequences. Right? So it's not all doom and gloom. There's still time to course correct and create a future where AI benefits everyone, not just the wealthy few. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even begin?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And like I said before, there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think it starts with acknowledging that this isn't just a technological challenge. It's a societal one.
Yeah.
We need to be having conversations about what kind of future we want to create with AI.
Right.
And those conversations need to involve everyone, not just like the tech elites or the policymakers.
And more town halls and less TED Talks.
Exactly.
I'm into it. But seriously, what are some concrete things we can do to prepare for this future? The paper talks about wealth being a key factor in who benefits from AI. Does that mean we all need to become like day traders or crypto investors to survive the robot revolution? I don't think it's about chasing the latest investment fad. Remember, the paper is highlighting the potential for AI to exacerbate existing inequalities. If we just focus on accumulating wealth within the current system, we're likely to end up with a future where those who already have wealth and power benefit the most.
Okay, so maybe instead of trying to outsmart the robots in the stock market, we should be thinking about how to create a system that's fairer and more equitable for everyone, regardless of whether they own a robot butler or not.
Exactly. And that might involve some radical changes to our economic system. We might need to rethink things like taxation, social safety nets, even the very definition of work itself.
So we're talking about some big systemic changes. But what about on a personal level? What can individuals do to prepare for a future where AI plays such a significant role?
Well, like we talked about earlier, focusing on developing those uniquely human skills like critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence will be crucial. These are the things that will set us apart from the machines and allow us to thrive in a world where AI is doing more of the routine tasks.
So maybe instead of trying to compete with the robots, we should be learning how to collaborate with them.
Exactly. And that means being open to new ways of work, learning new skills throughout our lives, and embracing lifelong learning as a necessity, not just an option.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a bit more optimistic about this whole AI thing. Maybe it's not just about robots taking our jobs, but about creating new opportunities and ways of living that we can't even imagine yet. But there's still this nagging question in the back of my mind, what if we get it wrong? What if we end up in that dystopian future where a handful of people control all the robots and the rest of us are left fighting over the scraps?
That's a valid concern, and I think that's why this paper is so important. It's a wake-up call. It's telling us that we need to start thinking about these issues now before it's too late. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to be shaping the future of AI rather than letting it shape us.
So to bring it all back to our listener, what does this all mean for you? The future of AI is uncertain, but this research suggests that our expectations about AI are already shaping the economy. It might be time to start thinking about how you can position yourself for a future where wealth and technology are intertwined in ways we're only just beginning to understand.
It's important to remember that this is just one model, and its predictions are based on a specific set of assumptions. But the core message is clear. The race for AI dominance might have already begun, and the stakes could be higher than we think. The future is still being written, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.